Te mihi tuatai ki te haukainga, te ati awa ki tūpoko tika, Ngāti toa rangatira hoki. Ai, he uri tēnei no Ngāti Pukenga Ngāti Haua. Ka noho mātou raro te maru o Hikurangi Maunga. My wife's whenua, just south of Ruatoria, beautiful block of land we live with our whānau, but it's moving down into the Makotote awa and out into the ocean. 100 and something years ago, the land was cleared in the region through mostly fire, which surprises me that our bush would burn so easily, but about a third of the country was cleared prior to Europeans arriving by our ancestors, and then a lot more up until the present day. In our part of the country, the geology is very porous and soft, and so we have this massive erosion problem. And many years ago, they started planting pine trees, which we thought were going to help with that situation, but haven't been the answer, and have now caused and will cause for a long time a lot of damage in the region. But I'm quite a practical kind of guy, and I'd rather talk about stuff that I do because I'm a bit of a doer, but I got lumped into this session, which is a bit more philosophical and theoretical, so I'll try and share some whakaaro that makes sense to me anyway, and makes sense to our whānau in our community at the moment, I think. And it's just a bunch of random photos, so you can look at those instead of me. I'd like to talk about a concept in Te Ao Māori called mate mate a one. It's a very ancient term, but it's one that sums up this deep love for the whenua and for a place and for a people. But it can also be used in a sense of grief. So talking to my wife, and we talked about this idea of solastalgia that's popular at the moment, and I'll talk a bit about that. But she came up with this term. When I did a bit of research on it, it did seem to fit very nicely, and it can be used in a lot of different contexts. But renowned Tūhoi linguist Wharehuia Milroy explained it this way: mate mate a one grows from within the group, knowing and getting to know each other. The physical cues, such as trees, mountains, rivers, and kāinga, are all factors that activate mate mate a one. The expression is used for a deep sense of love and often loss associated with a particular place and people. Papa Wharehuia goes on, so that's what I mean when I say that a kuia wailing in the whare mate is mate mate a one. And when we go to tangi, even if we don't know them personally, that is mate mate a one. The laughter in the moments after a pohiri is mate mate a one. See, one of the ways that I would describe this word is the deep regard for connection and shared humanity and with the whenua. The origins here are born in dirt and death, living and dying by the land and by people. Mate mate a one is the heart that yearns for this place, for our mountains and our rivers. So this primordial kupu, found in a story about Maui actually, and his grandmother, when he wanted humans to be able to live on forever, she said, nah, they're going to die, and she used this kupu, mate mate a one, to describe that. One is dirt or soil, and obviously mate is death. And so it's being used in a new way now, in our community at least, to talk about the loss of land, the loss of people, and we've seen that over generations as people have left our community. But this unbearable grief for what has come to pass and what this means for the future. And we're really worried about our kids and sort of their sense of belonging and commitment to that community that is getting more tenuous to live in. These are all recognisable in the trauma, as Rick said, of the colonised and the conquered communities throughout the ages. And, you know, many of our communities have already experienced the end of the world, and many third world communities have as well. And I think the rest of us in the sort of the Western developed world are just kind of coming to grips with actually, you know, shit's just got real, and but it's not new. It's not a new thing for many peoples. I guess the difference this time is that Mati Mati Aone is connected to a loss caused by extreme weather events and unnatural disasters. A community, particularly its landscape and land use, is changed so much by the forces of nature, responding to activities of human occupation, that it's rendered unrecognisable, at least in part and at times entirely. Solastalgia is a term now used in English for something similar. Coined by Australian philosopher Glenn Albrecht about 20 years ago, it's used to communicate the grief of people who live in a place that is being radically changed in permanent ways. And he puts it this way: where the pain of nostalgia arises from moving away, the pain of solastalgia arises from staying put. Where the pain of nostalgia can be mitigated by return, the pain of solastalgia tends to be irreversible. Solastalgia is when a familiar place is rendered unrecognisable by climate change or corporate action, and he did a lot of work in mining communities and saw whole landscapes change there, people feeling the same sense of loss. The home suddenly becomes unhomely around its inhabitants. Solastalgia is when is not specific to the present. It's not just experienced by Indigenous peoples, so obviously it has been a lot. John Clare, who's an English poet, is considered a solastalgic poet, and he witnessed his native Northamptonshire countryside disrupted by the enclosures in the early 19th century. Between 1809 and 1820, acts of enclosure granted local landed gentry permission to fence off the fields, the woods and heaths, excluding the people who had worked and played in them. Almost everything Clare loved was torn away. Clare documents both the destruction of place and people and the gradual collapse of his own state of mind. This is a little piece of his poem. Enclosure came and trampled on the grave of labour's rights and left the poor a slave. And birds and trees and flowers without a name all sighed when lawless laws enclosure came. So, of course, many of those displaced peoples ended up here in Aotearoa, many of your and my ancestors, also in Australia and America. Something similar has happened here, not just during the colonial period when the land was carved up into property by settler governments and their agents. That process caused untold grief, and the dispossession has created intergenerational trauma, as has been mentioned, at a scale we're only just beginning to identify, let alone understand or address. But on top of this historical loss has come a new Mati Mati Aone, caused now by weather and perhaps poor planning, an emerging wave of grief and alienation that will likewise reverberate for generations to come. But Mati Mati Aone also has a more positive side to it. That's that deep, deep affection for people and place. And I think we can all nurture this. While Māori have the longest connections to these islands and ocean, as tangata whenua and tangata tiriti, we all have a right to be here and to call this place home. The deeper our connection to a place, the more we should care for it. And I think that's the positive aspect of Mati Mati Aone in action, and one that we should be nurturing and supporting. As we reduce travel by choice or circumstance, we should find our reconnections to people and place deepen. Whether it's in some land we have responsibility for or a special public place that we enjoy, even a whole valley, a lake, a neighbourhood, a town or a region that we love. I think nurturing our relationship to people and place is part of the antidote to contemporary capitalism that has tried hard to separate people from place. The surplus value created by companies to acquire capital from labour and land is easier to achieve when people are mobile and nature is disconnected from communities. These are just a few photos post-cyclone and getting our communities back together, but as you can see, the whole landscape is collapsing, and there's big questions over how we're going to survive there. The hills are slipping away and the plains are flood prone. So it's big questions for our communities at this time. Perhaps unique in the country, but other places like Nelson, Marlborough, West Auckland, we've seen facing similar challenges. And so we're very much in a state of recovery at present, and that feels like it's going to last a long time. But there's, as you can see, strong community spirit and people coming together to try and do things differently. I founded a few companies that have been trying to do capitalism differently. We see nature or taonga and kaitiaki or communities as the central owners and beneficiaries of these enterprises designed to look after the well-being of both whānau and whenua. One of those companies, when we listed it on the NZX, and we've put on there a representative of communities who's there to think about the interests of whānau and whenua well-being. In another, we've made the species beneficial owner, shareholder in any money that's made from the company. And in a third, we've made the taonga and its ecosystem, along with kaitiaki, and these are some diagrams of how we're structuring the legal aspects, the actual owners of all IP. So there's investors who are investing in the research and development of new things, some psychedelic fungi, but the owners are the species themselves, so having entities that represent those interests. And actually, in one with the kaitiaki, they said, we don't want a financial interest in this, we'll let and this is 3 iwi entities, 2 in the Waikato and 1 in Tāmaki, saying we want the taonga and the ecosystem to be the beneficiary, to be the owners. And so anyone that's doing any commercialisation with that IP needs to negotiate with the species representatives in those of the ecosystem, which is quite a sort of different way of doing things too. I should say we haven't made any money yet, but it's exciting times. So yeah, and I would just do a little plug for the nature-related financial disclosures. I think getting nature, if we're going to have capitalism around for a little bit longer, getting nature on the balance sheet feels like a useful thing to do, and we'll have to monitor that with interest. And just the other plug for those people putting their bodies on the line, I think that's really critical as well, and we all do what we can, and it's awesome that there's some people willing to give up their freedoms in that sense, and the rest of us, I think, can support them financially and morally, whatever way we can, but I think that's really critical, and we're seeing how that, I've been reading Andreas Malm's How to Blow Up a Pipeline, and kind of we need, the reasonable folk, we need to be there too, but those who are, sort of, as someone said yesterday, being embarrassing, just to shift the dialogue and that frame of what's acceptable to talk about, and it's not till we start damaging stuff or really disrupting stuff that society seems to get the urgency of the situation. So big ups to you fellas. Kia ora.